Hey everybody, welcome back to World History. We're going to try this out today. New type of tech. We're going to see if this works. So we're starting our next chapter, still relatively the Age of Discovery. So get your notes out and let's get started. So our first section is looking at conquest in the Americas. So we're going to really just be talking about the conquistadors and like the Aztecs primarily. So, first encounters. When Columbus first arrived in America, a cycle of encounter, conquest, and death is going to begin. Columbus will first meet the Tainos people when he arrived in the West Indies. They were very generous and open. They lived in villages and grew corn, yams, and cotton, things that, well, to the Spaniards and to Columbus were valuable commodities. They'd never seen corn or yams before. Those were completely new things to them. So we'll have a bit of a cultural clash, and also our highlights are in gray on this chapter. While they were welcome, the Spaniards did treat the Taino people rather harshly. This is due to the Taino not paying proper respect to Christian symbols brought by the Spaniards. Columbus and his men seized their land, took some people back to Spain for the king, and pretty much killed anyone who resisted. They also required each person to pay them in gold or else, and by the or else, I am saying that they're going to get killed. But most of these people didn't have gold, so again, it begins that cycle of conquest and death. So, Columbus's encounters are essentially going to be repeated multiple times by several Spanish conquistadors. This is from conquerors who arrived in the Americas. These people are going to then settle into what is now the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. The conquistadors will then seize the Native Americans' gold and make them convert to Christianity, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But again, just remember it's this beginning and this never ending cycle of contact, conquest, and death. So, some advantages and disadvantages. The conquistadors had several advantages. First one, they had guns. While extremely limited, they did have guns rather than spears. They also had armor for protection and horses for battle and carrying supplies. Another big thing is Native Americans had no immunity to diseases that were carried by Europeans. So it's why when we talk about this, a common phrase is guns, germs, and steel. So the Europeans had guns. They also were carrying germs that the Native Americans had no resistance to, and steel. Again, that armor for protection was made of steel. All of these reasons are going to help the conquistadors take over the Native Americans. So, moving on, let's talk about Hernan Cortez. Excuse me. Hernan Cortez is going to own land in Cuba and wanted to then take over Mexico. No one had tried this before. So in 1519, Cortez shows up with 600 men and 16 horses and begins moving on. He uses a native woman named Malinche to help him translate languages and give advice. At this time, there were many conquered peoples in Mexico who hated the Aztecs and were more than willing to help Cortez take them down. Malinche is going to help them form alliances. These people now would help Cortez fight. News of Cortez will eventually reach the Aztec king, Moctezuma, and he thought Cortez could possibly be an Aztec god, so he sent him gifts like gold and human sacrifices, the normal things you do send to someone you think is a god. Well, eventually, Moctezuma will invite Cortez to his capital, Tenochtitlan. Relations eventually are going to go bad. While this was happening, though, more Spanish troops arrived to challenge Cortez, so Cortez has to retreat in order to plan an attack. And eventually, by 1521, Cortez was able to take over the city. The Aztec Empire will fall. Moving to Peru, so moving to South America, Francisco Pizarro is going to be heavily inspired by Cortez and wants to do the same thing to the Incan Empire. He'll arrive in Peru in 1532 after a civil war was fought for the throne. So again, they were already completely disorganized. Just like Cortez, um, Pizarro will form allies with groups that hated the Incans and slaughtered thousands of them. Pizarro will then move into the heartland of the Incan Empire, and with superior weapons and the Inca being weakened by European diseases, Pizarro will be victorious. And then Spain is then going to move across what is now Ecuador and Chile, and majority of South America will now be owned by Spain. Really, the only major exception at this point in history will be Brazil. This is a major Portuguese colony. Really, it's their only colony in the Western Hemisphere. If you remember that line of demarcation last chapter, Brazil was the only bit of land in the Western Hemisphere they were allowed to keep because they had already been there before the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed. So, some effects. The Spanish had gained a wealth of land, gold, and power in the Americas. The Native Americans, however, received very negative impacts from the Spaniards. Millions of natives will be conquered. They'll be forced to convert to Christianity. Some are going to fight for centuries to keep their traditions, but majority are going to be unsuccessful. Majority of these cultures are going to be completely lost to history because of the Spanish conquests in the region. Now, that's not to say that some weren't preserved. While many Native Americans were under the thumb of Spanish conquest, many preserved elements of their own culture, including language, religious traditions, clothing. In time, this preservation of Native American culture is going to influence the culture of Latin America. Um, so, that's one of the big things to keep in mind is that while there was some fighting, they were able to maintain some of their cultural elements. So that is it for notes for today. What you are going to go do is there's a Sheg Moctezuma packet on Classroom. You're going to go do that after you take the quiz. I will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.